chaos on American college campuses, anti-Israel sentiment, and so much more. On today's Higher Ground, I'm sitting down with Raj Nair. He is from TBN, and also Jesse Jackson from Church Leaders. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what is happening on college campuses, and we're also going to talk about an evangelist who is sounding the alarm on Taylor Swift's new album and lyrics. That and more. Welcome to Higher Ground. Let's get right into it. All right, Raj and Jesse, there's a lot to talk about here. Raj, you and I go way back, and you have spent, a number of years actually going to Israel. Like 5 times a year you would be there. You were bringing people over there. You spent a lot of time in Israel. What has it been? Let's just start with you on this. What has it been like to kind of watch all of this chaos going on? Obviously October 7th, but now these protests on college campuses.
It's very personal, Billy. I spent the past decade of my life basically standing for Israel and the Jewish people. I've taken people to Auschwitz. I've taken people to Majdanek. I've to Yad Vashem, the Israeli Holocaust Museum. I've been there dozens of times. And seeing what's happening on college campuses is way more emotional than it is intellectual for me. I've studied the Holocaust a lot, the anti-Jewish laws, the Nuremberg laws, Kristallnacht, and I'm not necessarily equating what's happening on these Ivy League campuses in UC Berkeley and USC to the Holocaust. But I have a friend who's passed away. His name was Irving Roth, and he was a Holocaust survivor. And he had this thing called road signs on the way to Auschwitz, meaning the Holocaust didn't start with crematorium and gas chambers. It started with dehumanization, the othering of the Jew. And I've been trying to think of a word to describe what I feel, and it's like a reluctant fear. It's like, oh my gosh, are we seriously doing this? Where Jewish students are afraid to show their Jewishness in Boston, in New York City, where rabbis are telling their congregates not to go to school, where an Israeli professor is barred from entering Columbia for fear of his safety, where USC is canceling its main graduation ceremony. And the thing is this isn't the Holocaust, but the road signs on the way to Auschwitz. These are the road signs, the dehumanization of quote unquote Zionists. What does that mean? That just means Jewish people who believe they have the right to live in their ancestral and indigenous homeland. The othering, the dehumanization, where I just never thought that this could happen in America. I mean, I know that's foolishness. Antisemitism is kind of the oldest evil spirit, if you want to call it that, I think the world has. And the thing is what's amazing is anti-Semitism always finds a way to become politically correct. It morphs. It's the ultimate shape shifter. Whatever the current I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm anti-Zionist. I'm not
right.
this. And to me, the fact that wearing a kippah, a yarmulke on the campus of Columbia, Penn, Harvard, and UC Berkeley, you have to worry about your safety, regardless of what you think about what's happening in Gaza. That should have the red sirens and alarm bells going off in every single person. But the exact opposite is happening, where people are cowering to this. And that's exactly what happened in Nazi Germany. If someone would have stopped Hitler and be like, no, get out of here, in 1933, maybe we wouldn't have had 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust. And so I think it's incumbent upon Americans and Bible-believing Christians to push back. And I know it's scary. I know it's unpopular. And, you might not fully understand everything that's happening in Gaza. And you see innocent civilians. I have personal Palestinian friends who have lost innocent civilian loved ones in the past few days in Gaza. I'm not saying that there isn't, Israel isn't perfect. There's, if you want to find someone who criticizes Israel, talk to Israelis. There isn't a problem with criticizing Israel or questioning their judgment in certain aspects. But when that turns from, I disagree with the IDF's policies in Gaza, to fighting Hamas, which is a genocidal, anti-Semitic Nazi death cult, that being aside, that's fine. But when Jewish students are scared to show their Jewishness in America, that should make us all very alert.
Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
Jesse, what is your in hearing that? Because you can tell, obviously, Raj, like there's a lot of passion there. It is personal for you, and there's a lot to unpack there. But for you, Jesse, like what came to mind hearing that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate your perspective, first and foremost, as somebody that's never been to Israel, just to hear, you know, things where you've been touched personally because of your connections, both in Israel and in Gaza. That's I appreciate that. What I almost want to ask you a question, because these are things that we're kind of wondering. What if you could, what would you say right now the church needs to do? I mean, we saw something in New York happen yesterday, which I think was the first one, which was, there was a pro-Israel march that happened, I think, yesterday evening. But
Yeah,
apart from
Patricia
that,
Heaton was in there. Yeah,
yes,
like tons of
yes,
celebrity. Yeah, yeah.
yes. Eric Metaxas, I think, was there. Sean Foyt, yeah, a bunch of kind of people. But I want to, push back on you, Raj. What does the church need to do, kind of, because in these type of things that go on, it's almost like we're just silent. Maybe that's just my
Mm.
perspective, but
Yeah.
I want to ask you that question.
It's a very difficult question, right? What could someone do in the wake of the anti-Jewish laws and the Nuremberg laws in Germany to push back against Nazism? And like Dietrich Bonhoeffer became famous, and what happened? He was killed for his beliefs. So there's no
Mm,
real easy solution. But I think the easiest solution is now, and the hardest solution is next week, next month, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, when things get out of control. So I think perhaps the most important thing to do is to equip yourself with the truth, with context, with understanding, so that when you hear lies spoken as lies, you call it out. And I'm
mm,
not to be like a Karen or something, but like I do think that there needs to be an educated, coherent, calm response where if someone posts something online, you respond, and it's not in a combative way. You present it with facts, you present it with compassion. The scripture says, do everything with gentleness and respect. So I'm not
mhm,
saying, go out and if you want to protest and march, that's fine. I think that's commendable. But I think it just comes with little interactions where you push back, where you plant seeds, you learn about the Holocaust, what led up to the dehumanization of the Jewish people, why, what is anti-Semitism. And I
mm,
think when we see something wrong, but we can't articulate it in a coherent, educated manner, we're just kind of like them. I mean, I'm sure you've seen a lot of these behind the scene videos of these protesters protesting for quote unquote Palestine, and they ask them one question, they're like, "Yeah, actually, I don't know what I'm here for. I just genocide or something." And
yeah.
so I think for us, it's, yeah, if you want to lobby Congress, and there's plenty of organizations that do that. I think it's like, hey, I'll give you a perfect example. I had a buddy who was it. I'm gonna, the details of this story. I'm just trying to recall them, but he's a very, very educated Christian believer who stands with the Jewish people. He's very public. I don't want to name his name, but he you would know who he is. Anyway, he was in a hipster dinner with like 20 people, and one person said this comment. This was maybe a few years ago, and said, Israelis are murdering babies in Gaza, and everyone was like, "Yeah, that's awful. That's terrible." And he said, "Wait, excuse me, what?" And she's like, "Yeah, they're murdering babies." He's like, "What do you mean? Where?" And he just started on. And the thing is eventually he got to the point where obviously she was shown to be a fool, and absolutely had no idea what she was talking about. But had that guy not been at that dinner table, that wasn't filmed, that wasn't on social media, that no one else will ever talk about, all 20 people in that dinner table would have believed her.
Mm,
Yeah.
And so if if it, like, I had a dinner with a friend, like family, and you should have seen their faces when I told them this crazy statement that, hey, guess what? Jesus is Jewish. And they're like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, believe it or not, his name is Yeshua. He was born in Judea, in the town of David. His name is, and they're like, wait, they've never heard this stuff. And I think
mm,
just basic understanding of, hey, the dehumanization of the Jewish people is as common as rainfall. It's going to happen no matter, but whether or not those weeds sprout out into full blown things where they start choking the flowers and the plants, that's
Yeah.
up to us. That
Yeah.
we can do.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and I think too, and feel free to correct me on any of this, Raj, because you are much more of an expert than I am on it. But I'll tell you, one of the things that is very frustrating in this conversation, I love what you said about, look, if there are critiques to be made because human beings are sinful, and Israel is made up of human beings, and they're going to make mistakes in war and in life. But this idea that Israel is just going out to slaughter all of these people for no reason, I mean, this all has to be put up against the backdrop of not only October 7th, but the Holocaust and the things that have happened throughout history, where you have a group of people. And when you talk with people about this, it's very clear they are not going to allow themselves to be slaughtered again. And so, when you talk, I mean, I've interviewed Netanyahu's spokespeople before, and they've said to me,
Hmm.
we are not going to live next to terrorists. We are not going to be wiped out. We will not stand for this. So I think you have to take what is happening and put it through that lens of a people group. And I'm talking even outside of faith, just common sense, a people group that is saying we are not going to be wiped out again. We won't allow it. And that helps you understand why they're taking some of the actions they're taking. Again, not excusing any critiques that might even be legitimate, or, we have to be open to understanding that, mistakes will be made. But I think a lot of people are not, they're not doing that. They're not understanding that context. And I'll tell you what you just said about information. If you look at some of the polling back in December, there was this crazy YouGov poll that found that among 18 to 29-year-olds, 20% of them believe that the Holocaust never happened. Okay. And this is in America.
Hmm.
In addition, there were another 30%. So this is 50% now, another 30% who were unsure of whether or not they believed it was a myth. So you have half of young people, and like this is a 28, 29-year-old as part of this. It was a small sample size, but I mean, that is wild. And there are other surveys. There was another survey that came out this week. 33% of 18 to 24-year-olds do not think that Israel has a right to exist. So we have a real informational problem right now in this country on all of this.
Hmm. Hmm.
100 million%. And I think it's important to contextualize what Israel is up against. The founding charter in the preamble of the United States, the Constitution of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. In the Hamas original charter, look it up if you don't believe me. It says, and I quote, Israel will exist until Islam obliterates it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's in their charter. And so when you
Yep.
have Hezbollah, which is another genocidal death cult sponsored by Iran, and you
Hmm.
have what used to be, the Islamic State and Jabhat al-Nusra and Hamas and Iran and the Houthis and everyone, the fact that the largest single missile attack in human history in a single attack happened, and then the next day Israelis sent their kids to kindergarten. Like, we've normalized this like genocidal spiritual demonic attack against the Jewish people because they can quote unquote defend themselves.
Yeah. No,
It's
it's
insane.
crazy. It's
Wow.
crazy. I mean, I'm the king of awkward transitions on this show because this is like one of the most important topics we could be talking about. And I can't even believe I'm going to transition into the next story. It's an important one, but it's nowhere near as important as this. It involves Taylor Swift. So I'm going to put it out there as a buffer as we go into that. But no, look, before I go there, we need to be praying for the entirety of the Middle East, for Israel,
Yeah.
for innocent people who are in Palestine, for all of it. I mean, this is, and there's also a lot of spiritual stuff happening here, right? So going behind the headlines, there's a lot happening, and we can't know the ins and the outs of every piece of it. But Raj, I just appreciate your, like all of your experience on that because
Yes.
you're kind of my go-to. You've been there so many times. So, but having said that, we're gonna transition into your story now, Jesse. Which, this Taylor Swift thing. I'm sorry, I'm just tired of hearing about Taylor Swift. Period. But then when I see a story like this, I'm kind of like, okay, well now I want to know. You covered something this week, Jesse, about Shane Pruitt, who's great. He's
Yeah.
a youth preacher and a great pastor, sort of sounding the alarm on this new Taylor Swift album. And so, take us through a little bit of what's going on there.
Yeah. I know Shane, and I saw him post it on social media, and I reached out to him and said, "Hey, brother, I'm gonna write a story on this with your blessing." And he said, "Go for it." So, he didn't say his post wasn't huge. He listed pretty much a warning. He's like, "Listen, I've listened to Taylor Swift before, so I'm not disclaimer. Um, So I'm not saying that I've never listened to her, and he kind of respected her a little bit as an artist. So kind of gave her those props. Is kind of what I took from his post. And but then he goes on and says, but this new album, and he gave the warning. He goes, there's a difference between being secular and being anti-Christian. And he went on to give some of the lyrics in the songs. One of the lyrics that I don't think that he grabbed and put in the social media, post that I used. Um, I went on and I had listened to the album, so I kind of was agreeing with what he was saying. And I listen to a lot of secular music. Taylor Swift is just not my, you know, cup of tea, I guess you would say. But I am familiar with her stuff. But one of the lyrics, and let me preference this: Taylor Swift grew up in the church. Now, what that looked like, how that looked like, I know it was an evangelical Christian believing church. That much I do know. So you can kind of see, in her lyrics now, and I think Shane was kind of pointing to this, how far she's digressed from some of that thinking. Because I don't think you would use a lyric like this. This is what she says in one of her songs. I believe she's talking about a former boyfriend, is from my understanding. It says, I would have died for your sins. Instead, I just died inside. Um, that should be kind of troubling when a Christian hears that, because nobody can die for somebody's sins, only Jesus. So I know that you're kind of playing the, lyricist, and you got that creative, I guess, if you want to go, that route. But that's just not something you should say if you know what Christ did for you. So yeah, I thought Shane definitely sound the warning. It hit a nerve. Um, I wrote it this week. We're about to the end of the month, and it's almost our number one article for the month. So if that tells you
Wow.
anything, was not
Everything she
expecting
touches,
that.
everything Taylor touches goes crazy, right? It's
Yeah.
look, I mean, I think there's and Raj, I'll throw to you on this in a second, but there's a couple of tendencies we have. Like, there's some people in the church who are like, don't listen to any secular music. There's other people who don't have any problem with it. I have an 11-year-old, and my 11-year-old, she's like, I want to hear the album. I want to listen to it because all her friends are talking about it. And there's also a number of songs, filled with expletives. Like, one song, apparently every 10 seconds, she's, F-bombing. So,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
I think for me, I try to find a middle ground approach, and I don't want to put that kind of stuff into my kid's head. I don't know, Raj, what's your take on Taylor and all this stuff?
Well, I'm in the JV space. I only have a 5-year-old, so my job is a little bit easier right now. But I'll tell you this much: I am not going to shelter my kid, but I want to extend his adolescence as long as I can from a um, garbage point of view. So, I'm not.
Mm,
I don't have a strong opinion on Taylor Swift per se, but I am guarding my child's heart a little bit more than I thought I probably would have as an adult. Like a lot of we have movie night, Friday's movie night, and I have gotten to the point where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to screen this first. I'm going to
Yeah.
watch this
mm,
first, because I don't. It's not that, like, obviously my 5-year-old is going to be exposed to a lot of things um, later in life, but I want him to have the most. I'm the leader of the household, and at the end of the day, what goes into his mind and brain is going to be what I give him as a 5-year-old, as a 6-year-old, as a 7-year-old. Now, when you have an 11-year-old, I can't really speak to that because I'm not there yet. You're on team varsity. I'm on just on JV. But I
Buckle
I
up,
have I
Raj.
have
Buckle
become
up.
I have become a lot more cognizant than I ever thought I would be. Because I'm the dude at the gym listening to Rage Against the Machine and Jay Z. But like I'm like, well, you know what? A second, I am going to guard my child's heart, because the garbage, and I'm not going to be. I don't want to be one of those like Bible thumpers, but the garbage that is being spewed, I'm like, you know what? No, thank you. And it's not
yes.
from a judgmental point of view, but like, I'm in charge of what goes into my son's eyes and ears. And as for me and my household, we're not gonna do that. So I found myself screening a lot of things that I never thought I would have. Not to just not have it go into it, but like, I want to keep him tender. I want to keep him innocent. I want to keep him desexualized as long as I possibly can, and give him
Mm,
a childhood that lasts as long as it possibly can.
yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah. I will say this, and it's kind of crazy because I always tried to kind of like, oh, I'm going to be careful. But with like music, I wouldn't really, even for myself, I just would listen to whatever. And the more that now that my kids are getting a little older, I've got an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. It's actually affecting what I listen to, and I'm hearing things and I'm reacting to them, and I never would have before. Even these old '90s songs that I'm like, oh, this is all so pure, and I put it on, and I'm like, what in the world? I never even heard this right the first time, and so suddenly I'm having this kind of like, gosh, I'm starting to feel a little bit convicted personally on some of the things that I've been willing to listen to, because I'm thinking, well, if I'm listening to it, is that affecting, like, am I getting desensitized to what I'm letting her listen
Mm,
to? And so it's this whole, I don't know if you've experienced that, Jesse, but this whole sort of new way of looking at even what I'm consuming. But yeah, agreed, Raj. Like, you want to keep them. I mean, my 11-year-old's asking me things I didn't talk about till I was 18. So it's a different world now. It really is.
yeah. No, you're exactly. Does this mean I'm on the varsity team because I have an 18-year-old?
Yeah,
Am I
yeah, you're
varsity?
done.
Okay,
You're
all
like in
right.
retirement.
Yeah,
No, dude,
yeah.
you're NFL, you're pro.
Yeah, bro, I don't know about that. Yeah, I have an 18-year-old. I have four, so 18 to 7. Little man does not listen to music, but the girls definitely do. I have a soon-to-be 16-year-old that, yeah, and they're aware of Taylor Swift. I obviously watch what they're listening to, but I don't put. I think I instill other things into them and speak into their lives that they know they understand. Oh, this is something I don't want to listen to because they're saying this. It's kind of the same mentality. And this is someone that is very heavily. I grew up in the music world. Um, tried to cut my teeth on the being in a rock band, a Christian music rock band back in the day. Was signed to a small label. So I Christian music and music in general, rock music, dude, it's a love for me. So I'm right there with you. It definitely it impacts, it infiltrates. You got to be aware of the spiritual warfare too, because it's one of those things that Satan can use in the most subtle way. And Billy, you said it. I was listening back in those, 90s songs and oh my goodness, what were they saying? Type of a deal. It's that subtle, you know. Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's very few things in this world that you know, and that's why commercials use songs that a jingle is going to stick in your head. A hook and a verse, it's going to stick in your head. The song you mentioned, that was repeated over and over again. If you go and you listen to that song in Taylor, where she's dropping the F word, both in the pre-chorus and the chorus, it's catchy. So all that to say,
Yeah.
you're spot on.
So, yeah, but look, here's the thing. The takeaways: pray for Israel, pray for the Middle East, and pray for Taylor Swift. Right? I think
Yes,
that's where we're.
yes.
I mean, look, Taylor Swift is super talented. I think whenever you have somebody with that much power, honestly, my prayer is always like, gosh, I hope they find Jesus, because imagine what it would do for everybody else, right? Like, imagine the testimony it is for the rest of the world, kind of watching them. And just, we're closing out here, but I want to say, because we were going to cover another story, but I'm going to actually hold off on it, because I want to point people to, and I'm going to put it in the show notes, an interview that I did with Jack Werfel. He is a Holocaust survivor, because I think it dovetails with everything that you were saying,
Hmm.
Raj. This guy, incredible story of how he survived the Holocaust, and he lost every family member. And he was saying exactly what you said, Raj. He said it's frightening. He said, because it could end up in the very same sort of situation. He was talking about the Holocaust. He's like, look, we're not there, but the things we're watching, he was paralleling to the things he experienced as a child living through that era. And it was very, very sobering. And so I'm going to put that in the show notes for people to check out. Raj and Jesse, thank you for joining me this week. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course,
Thank you.
man, anytime.
That's all for today's show. Make sure you tune in next week for another Higher Ground. We get into all the stories that matter to you. Head on over to the Washington Times and Higher Ground for more throughout the week. And we'll see you here back on the show next week.